Good evening, everybody. We are live. It is a good night. I got something real special for you tonight, so I'm gonna hop right into it. Let's see, click that. Okay, cool. Hey, look at that. I'm figuring out my transitions. That is still very loud. Hold on, let me turn that down a little bit. I just installed a new plugin, so I'm still sort of figuring that out. And if you notice, I'm not looking over. I'm looking over to the side when I'm fiddling with this thing. I've got my camera set up differently because tonight we're going to be trying something a little bit different. A form factor I haven't done before, and I'm excited to do it, and hopefully you guys enjoy it as well. Let me go ahead and make that change really quick before I get started with that. Let's see. Wow, it was only at 8%. That seems like it should have been lower than that, but bring it down to like 3%. There we go. All right, that should work. All right, so tonight we're going to be going into something completely different. I'm very excited to see this. First of all, I want to give I-Up Fan Williams, or E-Up Fan Williams, shout out. Thank you for the follow. I see that you subbed, followed, I should say, on Twitch sometime last night after I went offline. Thank you so much, though. I'm looking forward to having you in the stream and being able to kind of hang out with you and just do all sorts of different stuff. But tonight, we're going to be diving into something a little bit different. We are going to be doing a reading of creepypastas. Before I do that, I realized that for some reason it seems like I'm looking off to the side. I think I can fix that really quick. I just have to... let's see, calibrate. There we go. That way it looks like I'm looking more at you as opposed to staring wildly off into space. But that being the case, we're going to be diving right into it. I have 4 creepypastas lined up for us to do tonight. Not to say we're only going to do 4, but we'll see what time allows. We'll see what my voice allows. We'll see if you guys are actually enjoying this or not, because obviously if you're not having a great time, I don't want to do something that is just going to be shouting to myself or talking to myself. I can read these on my own time. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. But first, let's see, just click on that. Yes. All right. We got the atmosphere set. I think that's a good volume for that. Okay. Very exciting. I've got a little bit of caffeine here. Hopefully that's not too disruptive. But with that in mind, we're going to jump right into it. This first one is a classic one that I think everybody knows and likes. Well, maybe not everybody likes, but we're going to be starting with maybe the creepypasta that sort of started it all. It got us on this adventure. Something that everybody knows, even if you're not in the creepypasta world, because there's been movies and games and everything about it. That's right, I'm talking about Slender Man. I know it's a little cheesy, a little corny, but this is really one of those that started everything. I even remember back in the day there was some girls that did something horrible that I probably shouldn't say on stream to one of their, I think she was a classmate of theirs, for Slender Man, and they were found to be not mentally well, but that said, this was clearly enough to inspire something like that. So, quick disclaimer, please don't do anything violent after hearing this, obviously. I do not condone any kind of violence against anybody. I also don't condone a lot of the things that are happening in these stories. They are pure fiction. It's something that is created by a variety of different people over the internet over the last 20-ish years and has spread around and become sort of a pop culture icon, I guess. I'm not really sure how to say it. It became relatively popular on the internet. And yeah, just, I guess sit back and enjoy, but remember, this is all fictional. All right, so the first one here is, it's hard to tell where it actually starts. Okay. gonna be honest, the more that I read this, I don't know that I've ever actually read this. It's not really so much a story as it is sort of a lore that was built into it. I'm gonna come back to that one. This is not a great start to the stream, but I know you guys don't mind. So I'm gonna go ahead and hop over to one that I absolutely know is a good one because I have heard it before. Shout out to Creepypasta. I listened to that guy as a teenager. I started listening a little bit more in preparation for a Call of Cthulhu campaign I'll be running in the next over the next couple months, and wanted to kind of get into the spirit of it, and sort of gave me the inspiration to go ahead and do this because, you know, I feel like it's just anybody with a voice can you know, start this. But with that as well, I also have a surprise for you guys. It's not just this vocal synthesizer. Two. Have I been I'm not exactly sure what happened because I set my microphone to work and it was working and then it stopped working. So I've been sitting here silently with creepy music for the last 20 minutes. No matter, we'll start over. If you're watching this VOD, I do apologize. I'll try to fix it if I can. I'll clip out the portions that had no audio. Doesn't help to be so entranced and focused on what I was doing on one monitor, while the other monitor had the information I really needed. All right, we'll start from the beginning, shall we? So to start, we're reading The Sandman. Those who dream by day are cognizant of many things that escape those who dream only at night. Edgar Allan Poe, Eleonora. Go to bed and wait for the Sandman. Even as it came out of James' mouth, it seemed to him a strange thing to say, and he wasn't sure why he had, but for some reason, it worked. Daniel went to bed. The next morning, though, he asked, "What does the Sandman look like?" James was making breakfast. Daniel sat at the table, short legs swinging under his chair. "Nothing really," James said. "It's just an expression." "What does it mean?" Just something people say." He put a plate of eggs in front of Daniel and kissed him on the top of his head. He thought that would be the end of it. Until he saw the Sandman for himself. He was getting ready for bed and stopped by Daniel's room to check on him while he slept, as he often did. It was such a routine precaution that when he saw a pale, naked man sitting on the edge of Daniel's bed, rocking back and forth, it took a moment for him to process what he was seeing. He reacted the way any father would, of course. He ran into the room screaming, and for a moment he thought about attacking the intruder. But then the man on the bed turned, and that's when James saw that it wasn't really a man. It was a pale, slithery thing, hairless and warped, its joints turned the wrong way and its body out of shape with itself. When it moved, it was like an insane marionette dancing on a stage. James froze. The skittering thing watched him. He felt spreading warmth, and then he realized he peed his pants. Only when he remembered that Daniel was still there in the bed, staring at the broken-shaped thing sitting a foot away, did he regain the courage to move. He grabbed Daniel and ran. In the hall, he turned to see if the thing would follow them, but it didn't. For a moment, it watched, and then, moving like a stop-motion nightmare, it crawled to the window and jumped out, leaving only the billowing curtains to mark its passing. James had trouble talking to the police. He reported a break-in, but when asked to describe the intruder, he didn't know what to say. How could he make the ordinary man in the blue uniform sitting at the kitchen table, while two of his colleagues searched the house, understand a thing like he'd seen? He couldn't even understand it himself. To make it worse, Daniel's memory did not correspond to James. He described an ordinary-looking burglar. "A man in a mask," he said. James thought about it. Had it been a mask? No, it would have had to have been a full costume, and an elaborate one, something like what they would use in a movie. And that would not explain the way it moved. But in the end, he simply echoed his son's testimony. "A man in a mask," he said. "A burglar." The lie unsettled him almost as much as what had happened. The doctor said Daniel wasn't hurt and showed no signs of inappropriate touching. James was relieved. They stayed at a motel for a couple nights until they felt ready to come home. And then James had a new security system installed, along with bars on the windows. He didn't like the sight of them in Daniel's room, but it seemed like the only thing to do. James was frightened that first night back in the house, but Daniel strangely wasn't. When asked if he felt okay sleeping alone, he just said yes. In the end, it was James who found himself wishing he weren't sleeping alone. He was up all night listening for the sound of anything moving in the house. Although he had convinced himself that his memory was faulty and that it had been a normal, albeit probably deeply disturbed man in his son's room, when he closed his eyes, even for a moment, he pictured bloodless skin and a twisted, inhuman face. He found himself wondering, why my house? Why my family? He knew, of course, that there didn't have to be a reason. But still, he wondered. 2 weeks later, Daniel stopped talking. James didn't notice at first. Kids went through quiet phases sometimes. But eventually, he tried to get Daniel to talk, and he wouldn't. Eventually, it became clear that he couldn't. Back to the doctor they went. Nothing wrong with him that we can see, was the diagnosis. Was it the trauma? James asked. Could be, they said. Sometimes these things come on late. Children can be a mystery even to those who know them best. They recommended a child psychologist, whom James couldn't afford. He couldn't, for that matter, even afford the bill they were giving him now. Nothing seemed to help. Daniel would write out answers to questions sometimes, but never more than a yes or a no. When James would ask him what was wrong, or if he had heard or seen anything that frightened him, Daniel would only stare. He seemed furtive and bemused. James found himself missing the sound of his son's voice. Sometimes he wanted to hear it so bad that he ached. But it seemed that Daniel was not ready to talk until he was ready. James had other things to worry about too. He was convinced, beyond reason, that the intruder was not really gone. Though the alarm never went off and the locks and bars remained undisturbed, he was sure that he heard movement in the night. Not normal movement. It was a sound like a huge snake slithering through the house. When he heard it, he imagined horrible things. Nothing was ever there when he went to investigate, though he often thought he glimpsed something just out of the corner of his eye. A pale foot, or a misshapen shadow that would slink away as soon as he turned. He rarely slept, and when he did, he had haunted dreams. Soon, he realized that he had not left the house in weeks except to go to the bank and buy groceries. He felt hemmed in. With Daniel acting mute, he hadn't had an actual conversation with anyone in weeks. So, he called his mother. The connection was bad and her voice sounded faint, on the verge of not being there at all. "I guess I'm okay, Ma," he said, pausing to wipe the sweat from his palms, and then make sure he could hear Daniel playing in the next room. "But things have been a little rough. We had a break-in." "Oh, how awful," Mom said. "Did they take anything?" "Nah, just ran off. It was weird, though. I haven't really felt comfortable since then." "Are you still working at the hospital?" "No, Ma, I left last year. You know that." "Oh, well, have you been getting out? What about that nice woman you were seeing last year? The one who played piano?" James scowled. She was always asking that kind of thing. She didn't know how hard it was being a single father. Didn't she know how hard it was being a single father? That he didn't have the time? He was about to say so when something made him pause. "Ma, is there anyone else on the line?" "I don't think so." James was sure he heard it. The short gasping sound of someone trying to hold their breath and failing. A cold feeling crept across the back of his neck. "You're sure nobody is listening on your other phone?" "Dear, there is no other phone. I'm on the cell. That's why the service is so bad." "Then what is..." James stopped. If the sound wasn't coming from her... He dropped the phone and raced to the hall. The extension hung on its hook, undisturbed. Heart pounding, he hurtled into the garage. The spare phone sat on the workbench. No one was on site. But could they have been? Could someone have been here all along listening to his phone call and then slithered away? Might they be here even now? The next day, he took out the extra phone extensions. He even filled in the jacks with rubber cement. Daniel watched him work, eyes curious, but James offered no explanation. He began giving Daniel a light physical exam every week. His CNA training was a little rusty after a year on disability, but you never really forget. It was an absurd thing to do, of course. Even if there was a physical cause for Daniel's behavior, it would be nothing he could discover this way, and he was aware on some level that it was compulsive behavior. Nevertheless, it made him feel better. One morning, James set the diaphragm of the stethoscope against Daniel's chest, but he couldn't locate a heartbeat. He moved his hand in search of the right spot, to no avail. Then, to test it, he listened to his own heartbeat. It came through steady and clear, but when he checked Daniel again, he didn't hear anything. A thought came unbidden to him of the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, whose chest was as empty as a kettle. A sick feeling roiled his stomach. He threw the stethoscope down and grabbed Daniel by the shoulders, looking into his face. Daniel stared back with bright eyes. He even smiled a little with the corners of his mouth. James felt the tingle of tears. He swept his son up in his arms and hugged him, and Daniel hugged back. Then James put his shirt back on and sent him to play. The stethoscope, he decided, was broken. He threw it in the trash. Things got worse. James' terrors were no longer relegated to the long hours of the night. Now, it seemed that some creeping, some skittering and scuttling, some unknowable noise in some dark corner or another filled every second of his day. The thought of how big the house really was started to weigh on him. There were so many rooms he wasn't in at any given time. So many places someone or something else could be. He imagined strange figures occupying the rest of his home when he wasn't around, melting into the walls or merging with the shadows whenever he turned on a light or opened a door. How would he know if they were there? How would he ever know? Soon, he didn't even have to be outside of a room to imagine it. When he walked up the stairs, he pictured pale figures lurking beneath them. When he went down the hall, he pictured a crawling thing slithering behind the walls, shadowing his every step. If he sat too long in the same chair, he imagined that it was right behind him. He was never comforted when he turned around and found nothing, as he could only guess that it meant that it had moved, swiftly and silently, behind him once again. Wherever he was not looking right now, that's where he imagined it to be. He was losing his mind, he knew. The only thing that helped him cling to sanity was that Daniel seemed undisturbed. Other than his muteness, his behavior was perfectly normal. And whenever he seemed to sense that his father was troubled, he would hug him or squeeze his hand, or even smile. Sometimes when he left the room, James cried. One night, he found himself creeping around the house with no lights at 2 o'clock in the morning. If the intruding thing had taken to violating his daytime activities, then he would get revenge by confronting it on its own terms, the night. And really, night was no more frightening to him now than the day. They were almost interchangeable. He padded barefoot down the halls, up the stairs, in and out of disused rooms. Sometimes he stopped to listen, hoping to locate it by sound. It was a stealthy, creeping thing, he knew, but it was awkward at times, and it couldn't always keep its strangely shaped limbs from making their distinct, irregular footsteps. The smallest noise would give it away. There was one room he suspected it spent most of its time in, the spare bedroom. Not a bedroom at all, really. More like a closet just large enough to accommodate a bed if one were so inclined. It was unpainted and uncarpeted and drafty. He'd always meant to fix it up. He didn't come in here very often because he disliked the bare, unused look of it. It made him think of a partially dissected corpse. He came in now, though. If the thing made its nest in any one place in the house, this would be it. Of course, there was nothing there now, but that didn't mean there was nothing there. He cursed, running a hand through his sweat-damp hair. What was he missing? How did it hide from him? What was its secret? He peered into the room's empty corners one by one, getting his face a few inches from the plaster and floorboards so that he could be certain that there was no space for it to conceal itself. The light bulb flickered. He froze. My God, he thought. It's on the ceiling. He pictured it crawling above him like a huge, pale lizard. That's how it gets around, he thought. That's how it escapes any time I should have it cornered. He imagined it dangling down behind him like a spider. If I turn around, he thought, it will be there, hanging with its face right next to mine. He held his breath. He did not want to turn around, but he had no choice. It was between him and the door. With a quiet sob, he rounded on his heels. Of course, he was alone. There was no man on the ceiling. He checked twice. Maybe it crawled out and waited for him in the hall. But when he checked there, the coast was once again clear. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. After all, it had to be here somewhere. If the ceiling was not its trick, it just meant it was somewhere else. If the ceiling was not its trick, that just meant it was something else, something even more strange, even more clever. He went to Daniel's room. He had not stopped checking on him all night, like he always had. This time, though, rather than open the door, he listened at first, pressing his ear against the grain of the cheap wood and holding his breath, terrified that he would hear a skittering sound on the other side of the barrier. What he heard instead shocked him more. Daniel was talking to someone. James recoiled for a second, and then when he caught his breath, he all but kicked in the door. Daniel was already awake, indeed, sitting up in bed. But he wasn't saying anything now. The light flashed on, and James stalked halfway into the room before stopping, suddenly torn. What did he want more? To confirm that his son could speak again, or to find whoever he was speaking to? The creak of a door hinge settled the matter for him. He ran to the closet and threw it open. There was nothing inside, or at least nothing that shouldn't be there. He swept aside clothes on their hangers, but nothing was hiding between them. Then he dragged the toy box out and emptied it onto the floor. Nothing. He combed along the bare walls and floors, and yes, the ceiling, pushing aside every last bit of rubbish and stray knick-knack so that he could be sure, absolutely sure, that nothing was hiding. All the while, Daniel watched him. After a few minutes, James, covered in sweat, and the closet was bare. There were neither intruders nor answers inside. It struck him as funny somehow, and he started to laugh, very quietly. He kicked his son's toys out of the way as he went to sit down on the bed, dazed. He became aware, all at once, of several things. First, being that he had not slept in days and was nowhere near his right mind. The second was how close he'd come to really losing it for good. Tomorrow, he decided, they would both sleep until the afternoon, and when they did wake up, Daniel would get out of the creaky, and when they did wake up, he and Daniel would get out of this creaky old house. No more staying cooped up like prisoners, and no more checkups, and no more dreams about monsters.
He would even take the bars off the windows. It was time to get back to living like real people again. It was time to... James saw it when he brushed a hand through Daniel's hair. He pulled Daniel, a little too roughly, closer. His son acquiesced to the examination without fidgeting or complaint as James pawed the side of his head, hoping that what he was seeing would somehow stop being apparent. He stared and stared until he ached from not blinking. There was no denying what was right in front of his own eyes. Daniel was missing an ear. No, he realized with mounting nausea. Both ears. There was no injury, no incision, no mark where they should have been. Simply smooth, blank flesh. As blank as Daniel's quiet, unperturbed demeanor. James swept him up in his arms and ran into the hall. He wasn't sure where he was going or what he meant to do when he got there. He just knew that there was nothing now. He just knew that there was now nothing more important than getting his son out of that house, but their path was cut off. A naked man sat in the hallway with his back to them. No, not a man. James recognized its stretched limbs and stooped shoulders. The pale thing squatted on its haunches, rocking back and forth like it was palsied. It almost seemed to be in pain. James hugged his son closer and backed away. Then he heard Daniel's voice. "Daddy?" James turned to Daniel, and he heard the voice again. "Daddy?" But Daniel's lips hadn't moved. James looked back at the hunched figure. Its head jerked when it talked, like a tick. "Hello, Daddy?" James' mouth went dry. It took several tries before he could speak. "Don't call me that." "It is this voice's name for you." "Go away. Leave my family alone." "But I am your family." The longer it talked, the more the voice became distorted and blurred. An icy feeling nested in James's stomach. "Who are you?" "Someone who came to visit." "Why here?" "You invited me." James' heart thudded against the inside of his chest. "Why?" "I had something you wanted." James licked his dry lips. "You're lying. You don't have anything I want. I want you to leave. Leave and never come back." "Who is Daniel's mother?" James blinked. "What?" "Who is Daniel's mother?" "What the hell kind of question is that?" "How old is Daniel?" James blinked again. The thing's voice caused a pinching pain in the center of his forehead. "Stop asking me these things." "When is Daniel's birthday?" "I don't know." "What is his middle name?" "Shut up." "What was his first word?" "I said shut up." James wanted to tear the thing apart with his bare hands. Only the heaviness of Daniel in his arms kept him where he was. "You were alone. You wanted a son. So I made one for you." James' hands began to shake. "That doesn't make sense." "Made out of what?" "Out of myself." James' stomach turned over. "But now I need those parts back." Daniel picked at James' shoulders to get his attention. Something was strange about Daniel's face. "Danny? Open your eyes." Daniel scrunched his eyes shut tighter. Open your eyes. Danny? Danny, open your eyes. Open your eyes. Daniel shook his head, trying to refuse, but he couldn't hold it forever. Eventually, his eyelids flicked up, and James saw the truth. Daniel's eyes were gone. James almost dropped him. For a second, he wanted to throw his son down so that he could stop looking into those empty holes in his face. Daniel opened his mouth as if to speak, but of course, he had no voice. He is coming back to be part of me again. No. No, 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 give him back! Give him back! I cannot. It has been too long. I warned you this would happen. You're lying. You're lying. You're a liar. Give me my son back. Give him back. I do not lie. I warned you. He could not exist forever. But you do not remember. You can only remember what I want you to. You forget all the times we have talked. Daniel felt like a doll or an empty bag. His hair was falling out, disappearing before it touched the ground. His hands vanished into his sleeves, and his feet rolled up into his pants cuffs. James cradled the tiny, shapeless thing. Tears streamed down his face. Soon, he held a pile of empty clothes. And then, those too were gone. He looked around the house. Toys disappeared. Photos vanished from their frames. Daniel's little shoes were no longer by the door. James turned towards Daniel's room and confronted a wall where the door should be. He groped the blank surface, fingertips scrambling. He hit his head against the wall. The pain didn't feel real. Why did you do this to me? It was what you wanted. And I learned so much. This is impossible. People will ask, people will wonder. The police, the hospitals, the people in the neighborhood. They have already forgotten him. They only remembered what I wanted them to, like you. James pressed his hands to his aching skull. Will I at least remember him after this? You can try, but your mind will fail you. Now that everything he was is part of me again. James sat on the floor, looking at the blank wall. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the thing creep toward him, and even felt its wet hand on his shoulder. But he did not look at it. If I won't remember any of this, he said, then why tell me? Because a father should know. And then, James was alone. Abigail worried about James sometimes. When they met a year ago, he said that he'd never been married and he'd never had kids. There was a certain pained expression he assumed when he said the last part. Abigail knew that look. She'd met parents who'd lost children before. You learn to recognize it. And there were other things about him that worried her too. Sometimes she would find him staring at a particular spot on the wall, brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't seem to realize he was doing it. And of course there was the insomnia, and the sleepwalking to consider too. Yes, there was lots to worry about. but she loved him all the same. James still said he'd never had kids, and neither had she. She'd long wanted one, but it was impossible, and she worried that James wouldn't stay with a woman who couldn't be a mother, though he constantly assured her that it was not so. There were times, and more often of late, they were the nights that James took to sleepwalking, and even Abigail imagined that she'd heard strange, scuttling noises in the house and saw impossible shapes in dark corners. When she thought she would do anything, absolutely anything, if it meant to have a little daughter for she and James to raise. And at those moments, she became truly afraid, but she never knew why. Whew. This story is a little bit more sad than it is scary. I think a lot more sad than it is scary. But honestly, I think it's well written, even though it's a bit depressing and lingers on some very uncomfortable topics. I think it's a good story. This is one of my favorite ones just because of how well it was written. I don't know if that was the right one to start with. I'm beginning to wonder now if that was the right one to start with. Gosh, I really hope my microphone did not peak too much when I was yelling. But I guess I'll find out in the VOD. All right, so now we can move on to a different one. Let me get something to drink so I can lubricate the pipes. Okay. Here's another one, another classic. I don't know how many people have actually popped in. I guess we can pop over and take a look, see if... I don't know who this person is. Looks like a... Just gonna go ahead and time him out for now. I get a lot of people coming in trying to market, and it's unfortunate because I really want to interact with you guys. I like the idea of being able to talk with you and not having to worry about, you know, all the different things going on. But unfortunately, I do have to enforce the rules there because at the end of the day, I'm only one person. I can't patronize every person who comes through here. I only have so much money to put into this stuff. And I wish it were different. I wish I could help each and every one of you guys. But if you're trying to market to me, it's in the rules. I'm just gonna have to push you out. Especially if you keep it up, I have to. I'm sorry, but I gotta be stern about that. But with pivoting, I guess we can go right into another one. So this is another one that's I think world famous at this point. I'm gonna do this one and one more and see how we're doing on time. I had to restart because apparently my microphone was not coming through the voice modulator. So hopefully it continues to work. I see it's working right now, but it was outside my peripheral. These are unfortunate things, so it is what it is. Anyway, so this next one is a very famous creepypasta, The Russian Sleep Experiment. This is probably one of the most famous, most well-liked creepypastas out there, and there's good reason for that. It honestly is just a very good, very good creepypasta. So I'll get to it. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in an environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake, so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they only had microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with... Here, I'm gonna skip this song. I don't know if I even can. Let's see. There we go. I'll restart. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they only had microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep, but no bedding, running water and toilet, and enough dried food to last over 5 months. Enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised, falsely, that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversation took on a darker aspect after the day 4 mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think that they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity, with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather how they didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped, and so did the whispering into the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers decided check the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it was impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that the 5 must all still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at very heavy levels of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives they were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response. "We no longer wish to be free." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more response using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of a loved one, to turn the gas back on. The chamber was open, and the soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state of any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subject's thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were self-inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage with all 4 of the test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All of the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tracts of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his family jewels ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living test subjects had his spleen ruptured, and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one doctor. When his heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point where there was even more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeating the word "more" over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of prepping the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had triple the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in a struggle not to be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested, reluctantly, that they try the surgery without anesthetic, and he did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically impossible for the patients to be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple. Keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subject could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed their stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back into the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed into the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all 3 stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back into the gas. It was obvious that at this point all 3 were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might. First the left, then the right, then the left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off the pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for the EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering from brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as the one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things! Not with you!" he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded to know. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you so easily forgotten?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So nearly free." And that's the Russian sleep experiment. Not a ton to be said other than what you heard. It's I probably didn't do it as much of a a justice as it probably could have been. I'm gonna be honest, this website that I'm getting them off of is probably not the greatest website, so I'm having to do some double takes because the punctuation is all over the place and these spelling, capitalization, and some of the words just feel like they're wrong. I don't mind the yellow on black. I think it's fine to read. But honestly, when I'm going through and encountering issues, that's when it's that's when we're having some problems. I see a few minutes ago someone messaged me and asked if they can talk. You're welcome to come in here and talk. I'm streaming right now, so I'll have to respond to that afterwards. But let's go ahead and get to the last one. I think this will be the last one based on how this is going and how my ability to retain and repeat these words is going. The last one is on a different website, and hopefully this one works. This is another one of my favorites. I remember listening to this one years ago and thinking, wow, that's really interesting. Especially growing up in a household that really liked Disney. So this one is called Abandoned by Disney. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate. And there was even blame on cast members. Oh, there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of this story ends. It wasn't because of sand. It obviously wasn't because of foreigners or lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt the reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you'd know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened/pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Company had actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped out of their minds. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths not only in the center of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a darn thing anybody could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local venue came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic, and the usual annoyances associated with the influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down, and nobody knew what the heck to think. They were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I lived maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy stuff he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking the place. People there just felt angry about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local water when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though so many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace, take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not gonna say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of this place. That had been scrubbed clean. Even odder was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they had all swung Disney's way. They wouldn't want to be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know? Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather that their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old as hell map I'd received back in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to the people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved into my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved there to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth, tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area, mixed with a native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some past local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive. So grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entry. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants simply stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between odor and chaos. Between order and chaos. As carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxiously tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structure were broken, rotting wood, and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin, as bird crap covered the whole swaths of his fur and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled away and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they once had been, someone had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amidst this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space, no expense spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled of very old urine. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had a row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist and carefully letting it go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place, just like the Treasure Island resort. Someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks, and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I was there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut off the water a long, long time ago. There were plenty of rooms at the resort, but naturally, I didn't have the time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were simply wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoed in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't think that. Your father told you. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there and probably would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There, as a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped the photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the details of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal, across the grass and into the trees, all 80 feet of it. Its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at the Treasure Isle, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I had seen some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I feel better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. Using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock on the sign. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantonly steal. I'd come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually, that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall. Something nobody else had apparently thought of, or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For once, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall, complete with a filled-out time card. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old static-filled television and long rotted-out food and drink on the counter. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melted with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell into moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the palace. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped floor with the word Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first, and this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried. The door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room, unlike the other costumes. It was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white and white where he should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the wall, upward angles, downward angles, side shots, to show an entire row of frozen, putrefied cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the bedraggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there, between my shoes, was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the Donald Duck head immediately, as you'd expect, and moved to the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know? I had to, for any number of reasons that may seem silly, but if only you don't think it through. But only if you don't think it through. I'd need proof of what had happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if this was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's why Mickey, that photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor. That's when Mickey, that photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No, no, 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 no," over and over. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died, went blank and quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Wanna see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck, with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not for my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out. And that's Abandoned by Disney. I remember hearing this years ago and thinking, wow, that was an interesting story. And yeah, I mean, it's a creepypasta. You know, they're kind of hit or miss. Some of them are really good, some of them are not. I'm gonna put the camera back over here now so I can, there we go. Whoa, that glitching. They can be kind of hit or miss, honestly. I'm not going to, you know, be mean about it. I think the story did what it wanted to do, but it's a little cheesy. Let's be honest with ourselves. It's a little cheesy. Oh, but let's see. Been an hour 40? I think that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and switch back to the chill screen. Let's see how this works. Hey, all right. It's a party. Yeah, so that was Creepypasta reading. I don't know if many people, if anybody tuned in besides the one guy who came in and tried advertising, but you know, hit or miss, like some of this stuff doesn't work well. I may or may not do this again. It was definitely a lot to sit here and speak for that long. I'm ready to go rest. But if you guys want to see more of this, you let me know. I can make it happen. Just got to tell me that, hey, this is the type of thing that you want to see more of. The VODs will obviously still be up. I do have a Discord. If you are watching this from the VOD, you should be able to see that in the description. If you're watching this on Twitch or Kick, I believe it is part of my About page. You can just click on that. Make sure you go straight to the Discord there. Someone alerted me last stream that apparently my Discord link wasn't working, so if you have been trying to get in and for some reason it wasn't working, try again. I reset it. It should be working now. Let's see what else. Twitter. I have a Twitter, YouTube. I stream on Kick and Twitch. So one of those sources. If you're not following or subscribed on YouTube already, make sure you do that. Would love to see you guys in here. Yeah, that way you're notified of when I go live again, and we got a lot of different things that we can talk about. We can hang out. We can play different games. I've got a possible collab coming up, thanks to someone who happened to pop in here and said, "Hey, you're pretty cool," which I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it. I will let you guys know when that goes live, so make sure you follow me on Twitter for that. Other than that, I do have coffee. If you are able and willing, again, only if you are financially stable and you want to be really nice, you want to officially make me a professional streamer, you got the link up here at the top right corner. Be sure to click on that and even just drop $1. Like, I'd appreciate it. Any amount, it would help to keep these going. If I get enough made from this, I will upgrade my model. That is my first commitment to you. I don't know why I'm not smiling. Hold on. I am actually smiling in real life. There we go. Had to recalibrate. But yeah, no, my commitment to you is if you guys make it possible for me to actually make money with this and be able to upgrade, then I absolutely will. Model comes first, then we're talking about maybe some maybe 3D model. We could do some VR chat. I might look at getting the full body tracking. You guys can even just come and hang out with me. I think that'd be pretty neat. I just realized my synthesizer's busted. Hold up.
That's what causes it. Good to know. Frustrating. But yeah, this is the voice you guys are used to. Good to know. I'll have to take care of that. I'm still learning, you know, it's a work in progress, but as I get more proficient with this, you guys will get to see more of that. I'm looking forward to getting to hang out with you guys more, so definitely make sure you follow and shoot me a like or a comment. Let me know what you think and give me something to go off of. But thanks again, guys, for tuning in. I will be streaming again on Thursday. Still got to figure out a good time for that. I tried streaming a bit earlier last Thursday. I don't know if that really worked or not. I just got to look at the analytics, but yeah. So I guess I will wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. Thank you guys so much for watching. I love you guys a lot, and I am looking forward to seeing you next time. Have a good one.